February 14, 2019, Cheyenne Livestock Exchange. Tom Mackenzie had attended 847 cattle auctions in 15 years. He'd never spoken above a whisper at any of them. But when rancher Dale Morrison stepped into that ring, tears streaming down his weathered face, begging someone to buy his cattle so he could pay for his daughter's cancer treatment, something broke inside Tom. "I'll take all of them," Tom said, his voice cutting through the 67 head of cattle, $240,000. Every dollar Tom had saved since the fire. What happened next shattered everything Tom thought he knew about the night his family died. The cattle carried brands from his old ranch, the ranch that burned 15 years ago, the ranch where his wife and daughters died screaming his name. Someone had been waiting. Someone had been planning. Someone knew exactly what those 3 words would cost him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The auctioneer's gavel hung frozen in midair. 300 faces turned toward Tom like he'd just confessed to murder. In the suffocating silence of the livestock exchange, his boots echoed against the concrete as he stood, the metal bleacher creaking beneath his weight. "Sir?" The auctioneer's voice cracked. "Did you say—" "All of them." Tom's weathered hands trembled as he pulled out his checkbook. The leather cover was worn smooth from 15 years of small purchases. A heifer here, a bull there. Never more than he could afford to lose. Never more than what his guilt would allow. But Dale Morrison's tears had unlocked something Tom thought he'd buried with his family. The rancher stared at him from the auction ring, his face a mask of disbelief and desperate hope. Behind Dale, 67 head of Black Angus cattle shifted restlessly in the holding pens, their breath creating clouds in the frigid air that seeped through the exchange's metal walls. Tom descended the bleachers, each step feeling like walking toward his own execution. The crowd parted. Whispers followed him like smoke. "That's Mackenzie. Thought he was broke. Ain't that the drunk who—" The words cut off as Tom passed. They always did. His reputation preceded him into every auction house, every diner, every 2-bit town from Casper to Laramie. The man whose family burned while he drank himself stupid at Murphy's Tavern. He reached the ring's edge and extended the check toward the auctioneer. $240,000. Cash account at First National. The auctioneer, a thin man named Hartwell whom Tom had watched work dozens of sales, accepted the check with shaking fingers. "Mr. Mackenzie, this is highly irregular. We need to verify." "Call the bank." Tom's voice carried the authority of a man who'd once managed 3,000 head across 5,000 acres. Before the fire, before the drinking, before he became a ghost haunting livestock exchanges across Wyoming. Dale Morrison climbed through the ring's rails, his boots slipping on the metal. "Mister, I don't know who you are, but—" His voice broke. "My little girl. She's only 8, and the doctors say without this surgery—" Tom met the man's eyes. He saw himself 15 years ago, desperate, broken, begging God for just one more chance. "Get to your daughter." Dale grabbed Tom's hand with both of his, squeezing until Tom's bones ached. "Thank you. Jesus Christ, thank you." 20 minutes later, Dale Morrison was gone, racing toward Denver with a certified check and tears of gratitude. The crowd had dispersed, muttering about crazy old drunks and money burning holes in pockets. The cattle had been loaded into transport trailers, Tom's signature fresh on ownership papers he'd signed without reading. Tom stood alone in the emptying exchange, studying the bill of sale in the harsh fluorescent light. That's when he saw it, really saw it. Brand registration, TM Diamond 7. The paper slipped from his fingers, fluttering to the concrete like a dying bird. TM Diamond 7. His brand, the brand he'd registered 20 years ago when he and Sarah had bought their ranch with dreams bigger than the Wyoming sky, the brand that should have died in the fire that took everything. Tom's knees buckled. He caught himself against the ring's metal rail, the cold steel burning his palm, his chest constricted, each breath feeling like swallowing glass. Impossible. The ranch had burned. Every building, every fence post, every goddamn blade of grass. The insurance investigator said electrical fire. Faulty wiring in the barn. Tom had been 6 miles away, drowning his sorrows over a failed hay contract, while his wife and twin daughters died screaming his name into smoke-filled darkness. "Quite a purchase, Tom." The voice came from behind him, smooth as whiskey and twice as dangerous. Tom spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the Colt. 45 he hadn't carried in 15 years. A man emerged from the shadows between empty cattle pens. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than most ranchers made in a year. Tom had never seen him before, but something about his pale blue eyes sent ice water through his veins. "Who the hell are you?" The stranger smiled, revealing teeth too white and too perfect. "Someone who's been waiting a very long time for this moment." He gestured toward the loading dock where Tom's cattle were disappearing into transport trailers. "Tell me, Tom, how does it feel to buy your own ghosts?" Tom's hand curled into a fist. "Those cattle can't have my brand. My ranch burned 15 years ago. Did it?" The stranger's smile widened. "Or did you just think it did?" The loading dock's metal doors slammed shut with a sound like gunshots. The transport trucks rumbled to life, carrying Tom's $240,000 mistake toward a destination he hadn't bothered to ask about. The stranger turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the empty exchange. "Check your old property tomorrow, Tom. You might find the past isn't as buried as you thought." He vanished into the February darkness, leaving Tom alone with questions that tasted like smoke and 15-year-old ashes. Tom Mackenzie stood frozen in the cavernous livestock exchange until the fluorescent lights began shutting off one by one, each section plunging into darkness with a metallic click that echoed off the concrete walls. The building's heating system had cycled down hours ago, and now Wyoming's February bite crept through every gap in the metal siding, turning his breath visible in the dim emergency lighting. His hands shook as he retrieved the bill of sale from the floor, the paper crackling in the silence. TM Diamond 7, the brand that had once marked everything he'd loved in this world: his cattle, his land, his identity as a man who built something lasting. Sarah used to joke that he'd probably brand her if she'd let him, just so the whole world would know she belonged to the Diamond 7 ranch. Sarah. God, he could still smell her lavender soap on winter mornings, still hear her humming while she made coffee in their kitchen that overlooked the south pasture. She'd stand at the window in her blue robe, watching the sunrise paint the Laramie Mountains purple and gold, her auburn hair catching the early light like spun copper. And the girls, Emma and Grace, 7 years old with Sarah's green eyes and his stubborn chin. They'd ride their horses bareback through the meadow grass, whooping like Comanche warriors, their laughter carrying across the valley on summer evenings when the work was done and the world felt infinite. Tom's chest tightened until breathing became a conscious effort. 15 years of drifting from auction to auction, motel to motel, had taught him to lock those memories away. But standing here with his old brand registration in his trembling hands, the walls he'd built crumbled like ash. The exchange's main door groaned as he pushed through it into the parking lot. His pickup truck, a rust-eaten Ford with 200,000 miles and a passenger door that wouldn't close properly, sat alone under a dying streetlight. The wind cut through his canvas jacket like it wasn't there, carrying the scent of snow and sage from the prairie beyond Cheyenne's sprawl. He climbed into the truck's cab, his arthritic knees protesting the movement. The engine turned over on the third try, coughing to life with a sound like a dying horse. The heater blew cold air that gradually warmed as he sat staring at the bill of sale under the dome light. Where the hell were those cattle now? He'd signed the transport order without reading it, his mind still reeling from Dale Morrison's desperation. The destination could be anywhere: a feedlot in Nebraska, a ranch in Colorado, slaughterhouses in Kansas. $240,000 worth of ghosts disappearing into the night. Tom pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, a flip phone he'd bought at a truck stop 3 years ago because smartphones felt like technology for people who had futures to plan. The screen showed 2 missed calls from his landlord, Betty Kowalski, probably wondering if he'd have rent money after today's insanity. Betty ran the Sunset Motel on the outskirts of Casper, a collection of 12 units that had seen better decades. Tom had been living in room 7 for 3 years now, the longest he'd stayed anywhere since the fire. It wasn't much: a bed, a kitchenette, a shower that ran hot for exactly 4 minutes. But Betty never asked questions about his past, and she let him pay week to week when the auction circuit was lean. She'd become the closest thing to family he had left. 68 years old, with silver hair she kept in a tight bun, and calloused hands from 40 years of running motels and raising hell. She'd served him coffee and silence when he needed it, and occasionally talked him through the worst nights when the memories came calling with bottles of whiskey. "You're gonna drink yourself to death in that room," she'd told him once, standing in his doorway at 2 in the morning when she'd heard him pacing. Your wife and girls wouldn't want that. He'd never told her about his family. She'd simply known, the way some people could read pain like a language. Tom dialed her number. She answered on the first ring. "Tom? Jesus, it's past midnight. You in jail?" Despite everything, he almost smiled. "No, Betty. I may have made a mistake today." "What kind of mistake? The kind where you owe people money, or the kind where people end up dead?" "The expensive kind." He rubbed his eyes, feeling every one of his 58 years. "I bought some cattle. More than I can afford." A pause. Then, "How much more?" 240,000 more. The silence stretched so long he thought she'd hung up. Finally, "Tom, please tell me you didn't lose your damn mind and mortgage your future on some get-rich-quick scheme. It's complicated. It always is with you. Get back here. We'll figure it out." Tom ended the call and sat in the cold truck, watching his breath fog the windshield. "Tomorrow," the stranger had said. "Check your old property tomorrow." The ranch that had burned 15 years ago, taking his family and his life with it. He put the truck in drive and headed north toward Casper, toward the only person left who might help him face whatever ghosts were waiting. The drive to Casper took 3 hours through empty darkness, nothing but the truck's headlights cutting through the Wyoming night, and the occasional glow of distant ranch lights scattered across the prairie like fallen stars. Tom's hands cramped from gripping the steering wheel, his mind churning through 15 years of carefully buried memories that the stranger's words had dragged back to the surface. Check your old property tomorrow. He'd driven past the burned ruins exactly once in all these years, 6 months after the fire, when he'd forced himself to face what remained. The insurance company had bulldozed the debris by then, the collapsed barn where it started, the foundation of the house where Sarah and the girls had died, the twisted metal that had once been farm equipment. Nothing left but blackened earth and a for sale sign that never found a buyer. Who would want land soaked in that much grief? The Sunset Motel's neon sign flickered weakly in the distance, half the letters dark. Tom pulled into the gravel lot at 3:30 in the morning, his truck's engine ticking as it cooled. Betty's apartment was above the office, and despite her offer to help, Tom couldn't bring himself to wake her again. Whatever reckoning waited at his old ranch, he'd face it alone. Room 7 smelled like industrial disinfectant and 15 years of other people's disappointments. Tom sat heavily on the bed's edge, still wearing his jacket, still clutching the bill of sale. The paper had grown soft from his handling, the ink slightly smeared from the sweat on his palms. Sleep didn't come. He lay staring at water stains on the ceiling, watching the digital clock's red numbers advance toward dawn. At 6, he gave up and made instant coffee with the room's dented kettle, the bitter taste mixing with the metallic fear coating his tongue. By 7, he was back in the truck, driving southwest toward Buffalo Creek and the 160 acres that had once been everything he cared about in the world. The morning sun painted the snow-covered rangeland in shades of gold and rose, the beauty of it a mockery of the dread growing in his chest with every mile. The turnoff to his old ranch came up faster than he remembered. 15 years of avoiding this road had compressed the distance in his memory. The rusted mailbox still stood at the gate, though the name Mackenzie had faded to ghost letters on sun-bleached metal. The cattle guard rattled under his tires as he drove past the no trespassing sign some lawyer had posted after the insurance settlement. Tom crested the small hill that had always hidden the ranch buildings from the road, and his foot found the brake so hard the truck skidded sideways on the gravel. The house stood exactly where it had always stood. Not a house rebuilt on the foundation. The same house, white clapboard siding, green metal roof, wraparound porch where he used to drink morning coffee with Sarah while they planned their day. The barn rose behind it, red paint faded but intact, the weather vanes still spinning in the wind. Tom's vision grayed at the edges, his chest constricted until each breath felt like drowning. This wasn't possible. He'd seen the ruins. He'd walked through the ash-filled rooms where his family had died, screaming for him to save them. The truck rolled forward as if pulled by invisible hands. The familiar crunch of gravel under tires. The cottonwoods Sarah had planted their first spring, now 15 feet taller but unmistakably the same trees. The fence posts he'd set with his own hands, the gates he'd hung, the cattle guard he'd welded in his shop, everything exactly as it had been the night his world burned down. Tom parked where he'd always parked, beside the kitchen door. His legs nearly buckled when he climbed out. The familiar sounds of home washing over him, whined through the cottonwood leaves, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of the barn door swinging in the breeze. Cattle. Jesus Christ, there were cattle in the south pasture. Black Angus scattered across the winter grass like dark stones. The same cattle he'd bought last night at the exchange. His cattle, bearing his brand. A piece of paper fluttered under the truck's windshield wiper. An envelope, cream-colored and expensive, his name written across the front in elegant script. Tom's hands shook as he opened it. Inside, a single photograph and 3 lines of text written in the same careful handwriting. The photograph showed him stumbling out of Murphy's Tavern 15 years ago, drunk and oblivious, while in the background orange flames licked at his ranch's windows. Someone had been there. Someone had watched him drink while his family died. Someone had photographed the exact moment his life ended. Below the photograph, 3 lines that turned his blood to ice water. Welcome home, Tom. Your family never stopped waiting for you. Look inside the house. They're exactly where you left them. The envelope slipped from his numb fingers and scattered across the ground as Tom Mackenzie stared at the kitchen door, knowing with absolute certainty that his 15-year nightmare had only just begun. Tom stood paralyzed beside his truck, staring at the kitchen door as if it might explode. The photograph's image burned behind his eyes, himself stumbling drunk from Murphy's while his family died. Someone had been there. Someone had watched. Someone had planned this. The rational part of his mind screamed explanations. Hallucination, breakdown, 15 years of guilt finally cracking his sanity like an eggshell. But the cattle in the pasture were real. The house was real. The cold Wyoming wind cutting through his jacket was real. He backed toward the truck, his hand fumbling for the door handle. Get out. Drive away. Forget the cattle. Forget the money. Forget everything. Find a bottle and disappear into it until none of this mattered anymore. His boot caught on something. The scattered pages from the envelope. As he bent to retrieve them, wind lifted another paper. Not the photograph, but something else. A property deed. His name on it, dated yesterday. Transferring ownership of the Buffalo Creek Ranch from a company called Meridian Holdings to Thomas Mackenzie for the sum of $1. No. The word came out strangled. No, no, no. Tom crumpled the deed, threw it down, picked it up again. The legal language was real, notarized, filed. According to this document, he now owned the land where his family had died. The land he'd avoided for 15 years. The land that shouldn't exist because it had burned to ash and memory. His phone rang. The shrill sound in the morning silence made him jump so violently he nearly dropped the device. Unknown number. Hello? Tom? The voice was unfamiliar, male, nervous. Tom Mackenzie? Who is this? My name's Jerry Hoffman. I knew your wife, Sarah. We need to talk. Tom's grip tightened on the phone. Sarah's been dead 15 years. No, she hasn't. The words hit him like a physical blow. You son of a bitch, who? I'm at Murphy's Tavern. Come alone. Don't bring anyone. Don't call anyone. If you want answers, come now. The line went dead. Tom stared at the phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. Murphy's Tavern. The place where he'd been drinking when the fire started. The place that haunted his nightmares more than the ranch itself. He should drive away. Should run like he'd been running for 15 years. Instead, he found himself walking toward the kitchen door, his boots echoing on the wooden porch boards Sarah used to sweep every morning. The door was unlocked. Inside, the house exhaled familiar scents. Sarah's lavender soap, coffee, the lemon oil she used on the furniture. Everything exactly as he remembered. The kitchen table where they'd eaten breakfast, the cast iron skillet hanging on its hook, the ceramic cow cookie jar the girls had picked out at a yard sale. On the refrigerator, held by the same cow-shaped magnet, hung a child's drawing. Crayon figures labeled in Emma's careful 7-year-old handwriting, Mommy, Daddy, Emma, Grace. The paper looked fresh, not 15 years old. Tom's knees gave out. He caught himself against the counter, breathing in ragged gasps. This was impossible. The house had burned. He'd seen the ruins, walked through the ash. His family was dead, buried in Buffalo Creek Cemetery under a headstone he visited every year on their birthday. The sound of footsteps upstairs made his blood freeze. Slow, deliberate steps across the bedroom floor above. Sarah's bedroom, their bedroom, where she used to brush her auburn hair by the window and hum old songs while he pretended to read the livestock reports. Tom grabbed a carving knife from the wooden block, the blade trembling in his grip. "Who's up there?" The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched like a held breath. Then, from upstairs, a woman's voice. Soft, familiar, impossible. "Tom, is that you, honey? You're home early." The knife clattered to the floor. Tom stumbled backward, his shoulder blades hitting the kitchen door. Sarah's voice, exactly as he remembered. Warm, gentle, tinged with the slight accent from her childhood in Nebraska. "The girls are napping," the voice continued. "Why don't you come up? We need to talk about what happened at Murphy's last night. About the fire, Tom. About why you let us burn." Tom bolted from the house like a man on fire, his boots slipping on the porch steps. He threw himself into the truck, hands shaking so badly he couldn't get the key in the ignition. On the third try, the engine coughed to life. As he spun gravel fleeing toward the road, he glimpsed movement in the upstairs bedroom window. A woman's silhouette watching him run. Tom drove toward Murphy's Tavern and Jerry Hoffman's impossible claims, knowing he was walking into a trap but unable to stop himself. Behind him, the ranch house stood peacefully in the morning sun, holding its secrets like a grave. Murphy's Tavern squatted like a cancer on the edge of Buffalo Creek, its parking lot cracked asphalt and broken dreams. Tom hadn't seen the place in 15 years, but it looked exactly the same. Weathered wood siding, neon beer signs flickering in grimy windows, the same rusted pickup trucks clustered around the entrance like scavengers around carrion. His hands cramped around the steering wheel as he parked. The last time he'd been here, he'd stumbled out drunk while his family burned alive 20 miles away. The guilt hit him fresh, sharp as the February wind cutting through his jacket. Inside, the tavern reeked of stale beer and desperation. 3 patrons hunched over the bar like broken scarecrows, and in a corner booth sat a thin man with nervous eyes and hands that couldn't stay still. Tom Mackenzie? The man half stood, extending a trembling hand. Jerry Hoffman. Tom ignored the handshake, sliding into the booth's opposite side. "Start talking." Jerry's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. 15 years ago, I worked for Meridian Holdings. Accounting, low-level stuff, but I saw the books. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I saw what they did to you. My family died in a fire. Your family died in murder." Jerry pulled out a manila folder, his fingers leaving sweat stains on the edges. "Meridian Holdings wanted your ranch. Prime water rights, mineral potential, you wouldn't sell." Tom's vision narrowed to the folder. "So they killed my wife and daughters." "Not directly. They hired someone, made it look accidental." Jerry opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, bank records. "The fire started in your barn's electrical system. Except the wiring had been tampered with. Professional job. The photographs showed the ranch before the fire, his ranch, his family's home. But there were other images, too. Surveillance photos of Tom at various bars, time-stamped and cataloged. Someone had been watching him, learning his patterns, waiting for the right night. "They studied you for months," Jerry continued. "Knew you'd be drunk at Murphy's that Tuesday. Knew Sarah and the girls would be alone." Tom's chest constricted. "Why are you telling me this now?" Jerry's laugh held no humor. "Because I've been running for 15 years. Changed my name, moved 8 times, lived in constant fear. But 2 weeks ago, my daughter was diagnosed with leukemia. Same cancer that killed Dale Morrison's girl." He leaned forward, his eyes wild. "Except Meridian Holdings owns the chemical plant upstream from both our properties. The contamination isn't accidental, Tom. They're poisoning people to drive down land values, then swooping in to buy cheap. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Dale Morrison's desperation, his daughter's illness, the cattle bearing Tom's old brand. The auction yesterday was theater. Meridian owns Morrison's ranch now, has for months. They've been using it to run cattle bearing your brand, waiting for the right moment to bring you home. Jerry's voice cracked. They're not done with you. The revenge isn't complete. Tom stared at the surveillance photos, seeing himself through a predator's eyes. What revenge? I never did anything to them. You existed. You owned something they wanted. In their world, that's crime enough. Jerry gathered the papers with shaking hands. But there's more. The man who ordered your family's murder, he's been watching you suffer for 15 years, feeding on it. And now he wants to finish what he started. Who? Jerry's face went gray. Marcus Webb, Meridian's CEO. He's the one who... A rifle shot cracked through the tavern's windows, spiderwebbing the glass. Jerry's head snapped back, blood spraying across the booth. He slumped forward, his final breath rattling in his throat. Tom dove under the table as another shot splintered the wood above his head. The other patrons screamed, scrambling for the exit. Through the broken window, Tom glimpsed a black SUV speeding away, leaving Jerry Hoffman dead in his own blood and secrets. Tom crawled to Jerry's body, searching his pockets. The folder was gone, but tucked inside Jerry's jacket was a business card, expensive paper, elegant script. Marcus Webb, Chief Executive Officer, Meridian Holdings. And handwritten on the back, "Welcome home, Tom. The game has just begun." Sirens wailed in the distance. Tom pocketed the card and slipped out the tavern's back door, his mind reeling. Jerry Hoffman had died bringing him the truth. His family hadn't died in an accident. They'd been murdered. And the man responsible had spent 15 years watching Tom destroy himself with guilt. As he climbed into his truck, Tom's phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "Your family is waiting for you at home. Don't disappoint them again." Tom stared at the message, understanding finally crystallizing like ice in his veins. Whoever was playing this game hadn't brought his family back from the dead. But they'd created something worse, a perfect replica of his lost life, designed to torture him with what he'd failed to protect. The revenge wasn't just murder. It was resurrection, perverted and poisoned, forcing him to live forever in the moment his world burned down. Tom drove back toward the ranch in a haze of rage and disbelief, Jerry Hoffman's blood still fresh under his fingernails. The business card burned in his pocket like a coal. Marcus Webb, Chief Executive Officer, Meridian Holdings. The man who'd murdered his family, who'd spent 15 years orchestrating his psychological torture. But as Tom crested the hill overlooking his impossible home, a memory surfaced that stopped his breath cold. The insurance investigator. 3 months after the fire, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a briefcase full of questions. He'd been thorough, sympathetic, efficient, asked all the right questions about Tom's whereabouts that night, about the ranch's electrical systems, about whether Tom had enemies. The investigator's name had been Marcus Walsh, not Webb Walsh. Tom's hands went numb on the steering wheel as 15-year-old conversations replayed with horrifying clarity. Walsh asking if Tom had any regrets about that night, Walsh suggesting that Tom's drinking problem had made him an absent husband and father, Walsh's almost gentle insistence that Tom bore responsibility for his family's deaths. The same voice that had spoken on the phone yesterday, disguised but unmistakable now that Tom knew to listen for it. Dale Morrison hadn't been desperate at all. He'd been reading from a script, performing his tragedy while his puppet master watched from the auction house shadows. Tom parked beside the kitchen door, his movements mechanical. Inside, the house waited in perfect stillness. No footsteps upstairs now, no impossible voices calling his name. Just the weight of a trap 15 years in the making. On the kitchen table sat another envelope, cream paper elegant as a funeral announcement. Tom's name written in that same careful script. Inside, a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed Sarah and the twins at their graveside. Not their real graves, but 3 fresh headstones in an unfamiliar cemetery. The headstones were blank except for dates, died February 14, 2009. Reborn February 14, 2024. Yesterday's date. Below the photograph, 5 words that shattered everything Tom thought he understood. They never forgave your betrayal. Tom stared at the message, and suddenly the truth hit him like a physical blow. Not the manufactured truth Webb had fed him through his insurance investigator persona, but the real truth Tom had buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. The fight. The night of the fire, before Tom went to Murphy's, he and Sarah had fought, screamed at each other in the kitchen while the twins cowered upstairs. About money, about the ranch's mounting debts, about Tom's drinking, but underneath it all, about the thing neither of them wanted to name. Tom had been planning to leave them. He'd already contacted a lawyer about selling the ranch over Sarah's objections, had been meeting secretly with buyers, including a representative from Meridian Holdings who'd offered twice the land's market value. Tom told himself it was practical. They were drowning in debt. The ranch was failing. Sarah's dreams of keeping the family land were naive fantasies. But Sarah knew. She'd found the paperwork hidden in his truck, the preliminary sales agreements, the hotel receipts from meetings with potential buyers in Cheyenne. The fight that night hadn't been about money at all. It had been about Tom's cowardice, his willingness to destroy everything she loved rather than fight for it. "You're going to sell my father's ranch and leave us with nothing," she'd screamed. "This is our children's heritage, Tom, their birthright, and you're trading it for money to drink away your failures. It's just land, Sarah, just dirt and grass and debts we can't pay. It's home, but I guess home never meant much to you." Tom had stormed out, choosing whiskey over reconciliation, choosing Murphy's over the hard conversation that might have saved them all. And while he'd wallowed in self-pity and bourbon, someone had lit a match to his world. The revelation hit him like a freight train. Webb hadn't just murdered his family. He'd exploited Tom's own betrayal to do it. Had probably been watching, waiting for the perfect night when Tom's cowardice would leave his loved ones defenseless. For 15 years, Tom had carried guilt over being absent when his family died. But the real guilt was darker. He'd been planning to abandon them anyway. The fire had just beaten him to it. Behind him, footsteps descended the stairs. Slow, deliberate, accompanied by the soft whisper of a woman's skirt against wood. Tom turned, knowing what he'd see but helpless to look away. Sarah stood in the kitchen doorway, exactly as she'd looked 15 years ago. Auburn hair, green eyes, wearing the yellow dress she'd died in. But her expression held none of the warmth he remembered, only cold, terrible knowledge. "Hello, Tom," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 15 years' worth of unanswered questions. "Ready to finish what you started?" And from upstairs came the sound of children laughing, high, bright voices that made Tom's blood freeze with recognition and impossibility. The game wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Tom's legs nearly buckled as Sarah stepped fully into the kitchen, her yellow dress rustling against the doorframe exactly as it had that final night. The laugh lines around her eyes were gone, replaced by something harder, more knowing. She moved with the fluid grace of memory made flesh, but her eyes held the weight of 15 years in the grave. "You look older," she said, studying his weathered face with clinical detachment. "Guilt ages a man faster than whiskey, doesn't it?" Tom's mouth worked soundlessly. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. But the scent of her lavender soap filled the air, and when she moved, the floorboards creaked under her feet just as they always had. "You're not real," he whispered. "Real enough." Sarah pulled out a kitchen chair, her chair, the one that faced the window so she could watch the sunrise while drinking her coffee. "We need to talk, Tom, about that night, about what you were planning before the fire took the choice away." The children's laughter upstairs grew louder, punctuated by the sound of running feet across the bedroom floor. Emma and Grace, playing some impossible game in rooms that should have been ash and memory. "They don't know yet," Sarah continued, settling into her chair with familiar ease. "About the papers you hid, about the meetings with Meridian, about how you were going to sell their birthright and disappear into a bottle." Her voice carried no anger, only a terrible sadness. "But they will. Children always learn the truth eventually." Tom gripped the counter, his knuckles white against the wood. "I was trying to save us. The debts were drowning us, Sarah. We would have lost everything anyway." So you decided to lose it for us." She folded her hands in her lap, the gesture achingly familiar. "At least, that way you could blame necessity instead of cowardice." The accusation hit like a physical blow because it was true. Tom had been drowning in his own failures, as a rancher, as a husband, as a man. Selling to Meridian had seemed like salvation, a way to escape with enough money to start over somewhere else, away from the ranch that reminded him daily of his inadequacies, away from Sarah's disappointed silences, away from the responsibility of raising daughters who deserved better than a father who solved problems with whiskey and avoidance. "I never signed anything," Tom said weakly. "Because you didn't get the chance." Sarah's green eyes never wavered from his face. "Marcus Webb was very thorough in his research, Tom. He knew about your drinking, your debts, your meetings with his representatives. He knew you'd abandon us eventually. The fire just expedited the process." The revelation twisted in Tom's gut like a knife. Webb hadn't just exploited Tom's absence that night, he'd counted on it, had studied Tom's patterns, his weaknesses, his cowardice, and built his plan around the certainty that when things got difficult, Tom Mackenzie would run. "He's been watching you suffer for 15 years, Sarah continued, "feeding on your guilt, your self-destruction, but it was never enough, was it? Because deep down he knew the truth. You weren't mourning us. You were mourning your own lost opportunity to escape." Footsteps thundered down the stairs, and Emma appeared in the doorway. 7 years old, pigtails bouncing, wearing the blue dress she'd died in. Her face lit up when she saw Tom, the same radiant smile that had once been the brightest part of his days. "Daddy!" She ran toward him, arms outstretched. Tom instinctively reached for her, but his hands passed through empty air. Emma's image wavered like heat shimmer, her smile fading to confusion. "Why won't you hold me, Daddy?" she whispered, her voice carrying an echo of the grave. "Don't you love me anymore?" Grace appeared beside her sister, identical in death as they'd been in life. Both girls stared at Tom with eyes too knowing for 7-year-olds, eyes that held the weight of abandonment and betrayal. "He was going to leave us anyway," Grace said to Emma, her voice matter-of-fact. "Mommy showed us the papers, the ones he hid in his truck." Emma's face crumpled. "But why, Daddy? Weren't we good enough?" Tom sank to his knees, reaching for daughters who existed only as instruments of his torture. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I never wanted—" "You never wanted us," Sarah finished. "Not really. We were just obligations. Chains keeping you tied to a life you'd already decided to abandon." The kitchen dissolved around him, walls becoming transparent, revealing the ranch as it truly was, charred beams and ash, scorched earth where his family's dreams had burned. But the voices remained, circling him like vultures. "He's coming, you know," Sarah said, her voice growing distant. "Marcus Webb. He's waited 15 years to see you break completely, to prove that some men are born to destroy everything they touch." Tom closed his eyes, understanding finally crystallizing. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth, about forcing him to confront not just his failure to save his family, but his willingness to abandon them. Webb was coming to finish what he'd started, and Tom finally understood the game's real purpose, not just to punish him for his family's deaths, but to prove he'd never deserved them in the first place. The sound of a car engine cut through the phantom voices like a blade. Tom opened his eyes as headlights swept across the charred beams of what had been his kitchen, and the ghosts of his family faded like morning mist. The house around him returned to its true state, blackened timber and ash, weeds growing through the foundation where his daughters had once played. A black sedan pulled to a stop beside Tom's truck. The engine died, leaving only the whisper of wind through burned rafters. Tom rose slowly, his knees protesting, and watched as a tall figure emerged from the driver's seat. Marcus Webb looked older than he had 15 years ago, his hair silver now, his face lined with the satisfaction of a patient predator. He wore an expensive suit that seemed grotesquely out of place among the ruins, and his smile held the warmth of winter moonlight. "Hello, Tom." Webb's voice carried the same false sympathy Tom remembered from their insurance meetings. "I see you've been having a conversation with the past." Tom's hand drifted to the revolver at his hip, the same gun he'd carried as ranch foreman, the the one he'd cleaned obsessively in those first dark months after the fire. Come to finish it, have you? Finish it? Webb laughed, a sound like ice cracking. My dear Tom, this was finished the moment you walked into that auction house. Everything since has been epilogue. He stepped carefully through the debris, his polished shoes crunching on glass and charred wood. In his hand he carried a manila folder, thick with documents. Do you know what you cost me, Tom? Webb stopped 10 feet away, just beyond the reach of Tom's shadow. Not the ranch. I bought that for pennies from your bankruptcy proceedings. Not the mineral rights, though they've proven quite profitable. No, you cost me something far more valuable. Tom's grip tightened on the revolver's handle. My family's lives. Your capitulation. Webb's eyes glittered with old rage. You were supposed to break, Tom. Supposed to sell to me and slink away like the coward you'd already proven yourself to be. But the fire made you a victim. A tragic figure worthy of sympathy. The folder fell open in Webb's hands, photographs spilling onto the ash-covered ground, images of Tom over the years, drunk in dozens of different bars, sleeping in his truck, wandering cattle auctions like a ghost. An encyclopedia of self-destruction, meticulously catalogued. I've watched you suffer for 15 years, Webb continued. Fed you jobs when you needed them, made sure you never stayed in one place long enough to heal. I wanted to see you destroy yourself completely, to prove that some men are born to ruin everything they touch. Tom drew the revolver, its weight familiar in his hand. You murdered my wife and daughters. I removed obstacles to a business transaction. Webb's tone remained conversational, as if discussing the weather. Your family was simply collateral damage in your own moral failure. They were innocent. Were they? Webb tilted his head. Emma had your eyes, Tom. The same weak, shifty eyes that couldn't meet your wife's gaze when you hid those sales documents. And Grace, clever little Grace who found them anyway. How long before they grew up to be as disappointing as their father? The rage that filled Tom was pure and clean, burning away 15 years of guilt and self-hatred. He raised the gun, sighting down the barrel at Webb's chest. Go ahead, Webb said softly. Pull the trigger. Become the killer you've always been in your heart. Prove that I was right about you. Tom's finger tightened on the trigger. One squeeze, one bullet. Justice for Sarah, for Emma, for Grace. An end to 15 years of agony. But as his finger reached the breaking point, Sarah's voice whispered in his memory. Some men choose to be better than they were. Not the bitter ghost that had tormented him in the kitchen, but the real Sarah, the woman who had loved him despite his flaws, who had believed he could change even when he didn't believe it himself. Tom lowered the gun. Webb's face twisted with fury. You coward. Even now, even after everything, you can't. No, Tom said quietly. I won't give you the satisfaction. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his eyes never leaving Webb's face. I need to report a murder. Multiple murders. The man responsible is standing right here. Webb lunged forward, but Tom was ready. 15 years of manual labor had kept him strong, and grief had taught him patience. He sidestepped Webb's rush, brought the gun barrel down across the older man's skull, and watched him crumple to the ash-covered ground. As sirens wailed in the distance, Tom knelt beside the ruins of his kitchen and whispered to the empty air, I'm sorry I couldn't save you, but I won't dishonor your memory by becoming him. The wind through the burned timbers sounded almost like forgiveness. The police arrived 12 minutes later, their red and blue lights painting the charred ruins in colors of emergency and finality. Sheriff Patricia Hawkins emerged from the lead cruiser, her weathered face grim in the strobing light. She'd been a deputy 15 years ago when Tom's world had burned, and her eyes held the weight of old sympathy mixed with professional caution. Tom Mackenzie, she said, studying the unconscious man at his feet. Been a long time. Yes, ma'am. Tom holstered his revolver and stepped back, hands visible. This is Marcus Webb. He killed my family. The confession took 3 hours. Tom sat in the sheriff's office, coffee growing cold between his palms, and told the story he'd been too broken to understand 15 years ago. Webb's manipulation, the cattle auction trap, the photographs documenting Tom's orchestrated descent into self-destruction. evidence of a patient predator who'd confused justice with revenge. Webb, conscious now but silent, sat handcuffed in the adjacent cell. His expensive suit was torn, his silver hair disheveled, but his eyes still held that calculating coldness. Even in defeat, he was measuring angles, looking for escape routes. Insurance investigator, Sheriff Hawkins mused, reviewing Webb's falsified credentials. Gave him access to everything. Your financial records, your habits, your weaknesses. Son of a bitch played a long game. Tom nodded. 15 years. Why now? Why reveal himself after all this time? Tom considered the question. Because watching me suffer wasn't enough anymore. He needed to prove something, that I was always going to destroy my family one way or another. The fire just saved him the trouble of waiting for me to abandon them. The sheriff's pen scratched against paper. And the cattle? The auction? Theater. Tom's voice was hollow. Every detail designed to lead me back here, to force me to confront what I'd lost, what I'd been planning to throw away. Dawn was breaking when Tom finally walked out of the sheriff's office. The sky over Laramie painted itself in shades of pink and gold, colors he hadn't really noticed in 15 years. His truck sat in the parking lot, patient as an old horse, but Tom found himself reluctant to climb behind the wheel. Where did a man go when the ghosts that had driven him were finally laid to rest? He drove slowly back to the ranch, taking roads he'd once known by heart. The charred ruins looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, less mythic. Just burned wood and broken dreams, weeds reclaiming scorched earth. But the weight that had pressed against his chest for 15 years was gone, replaced by something he'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. Not happiness. That would take time if it ever came at all. But peace. Tom parked beside the ruins of his kitchen and walked carefully through the debris. In the corner where Sarah's herb garden had once flourished, a few hardy wildflowers had pushed through the ash. Montana paintbrush, red as sunrise. Sarah would have liked that. He knelt and cleared away the charred wood, making space for the flowers to grow. The work was meditative, purposeful. For the first time in 15 years, Tom Mackenzie was building something instead of running from it. As he worked, memories surfaced, not the bitter phantoms that had tormented him, but real moments. Sarah laughing at his terrible jokes, Emma and Grace chasing fireflies on summer evenings, the weight of his daughters on his lap during bedtime stories. The life he'd had before fear and weakness had convinced him it wasn't enough. He'd been planning to leave them. That truth would always live in his chest like a scar. But he hadn't left, and in the end, that choice, however small, however accidental, mattered more than Webb's manufactured revenge. The sun climbed higher, warming his face as he cleared the last of the debris from the garden space. Tomorrow he'd buy seeds. Lavender for Sarah's memory, sunflowers for the twins, maybe some vegetables, tomatoes, and corn, the practical plants Sarah had always favored over ornamental flowers. He'd stay in Laramie, he decided, find work on one of the ranches, honest work that didn't require running from town to town like a man pursued by demons. The demons were gone now, replaced by ghosts he could live with, the gentle spirits of love and loss and imperfect remembrance. Tom stood, brushing ash from his knees, and looked out over the rolling prairie that had once been his world. In the distance, cattle moved slowly across green pasture, and somewhere a meadowlark sang its liquid song. The land endured, patient and forgiving, waiting for those strong enough to tend it. For the first time in 15 years, Thomas Mackenzie felt strong enough to try. He climbed into his truck, turned the key, and drove away from the ruins without looking back. Behind him, the wildflowers caught the morning light like small flames, already reaching toward the sun,